The dust-laden winds of the Sierra Nevada foothills carried something more precious than gold when Catharine Valmont stumbled into Independence, California, in the summer of 1868, a woman with nothing left but the clothes on her back and eyes haunted by ghosts no one else could see. The journey west had nearly claimed her life. The stagecoach that had brought her from St. Louis had been ambushed 2 days prior, the driver killed instantly by a bullet to the chest. The other passengers, a banker and his wife, a young miner with dreams of striking it rich, had perished too. Only Catharine had survived, crawling away as the bandits rummaged through the luggage, hiding in the scrubby brush until darkness fell, then walking without direction until exhaustion and thirst nearly overcame her. Independence sat nestled at the eastern edge of the Owens Valley, dwarfed by the imposing mountains that separated it from the rest of California. Once a mining boomtown, it had settled into a quieter existence as a supply stop for travelers and ranchers. The single dusty street was lined with the essential businesses of frontier life: a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, a livery stable, and a jailhouse that doubled as the sheriff's office. Catharine's once fine traveling dress was torn and filthy, her dark hair falling loose from what had been an elegant coiffure. Her lips were cracked from dehydration, and every step sent pain shooting through her blistered feet. The few townsfolk on the street that morning stopped to stare as she stumbled past the livery stable, her gaze fixed on the hotel ahead, the sign of civilization that promised water and rest. She never made it that far. Her vision tunneled, the world tilting beneath her feet as she collapsed in the middle of the dusty street. When Catharine's eyes fluttered open, she found herself lying on a narrow bed in an unfamiliar room. Panic surged through her body, and she tried to sit up, only to be gently pushed back by a firm hand. "Easy now, miss. You're safe." The voice was deep and steady, with a slight drawl that marked him as not being from California originally. As her vision cleared, Catharine found herself looking up at a man with weathered features and eyes the color of the summer sky. He wore a plain cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-bronzed forearms, and a battered Stetson lay on the small table beside the bed. Who her voice caught, her throat too dry to form words. "Name's Russell Lawson," he said, reaching for a tin cup filled with water. "Most folks just call me Russ." He slipped an arm beneath her shoulders, helping her sit up enough to drink. "Small sips now, don't want to make yourself sick." The water was cool and sweet, like nothing she'd ever tasted. Catharine forced herself to drink slowly, though every instinct screamed at her to gulp it down. "Where am I?" she managed when the cup was empty. "My place. Above the livery stable. I'm the blacksmith here in Independence." He set the cup aside. "Doc Pearson's been by to check on you. Said you're suffering from heat stroke and exhaustion, but nothing that rest and water won't cure." Memories flooded back, and Catharine flinched involuntarily. The stagecoach Russell's expression darkened. "We found it. Sheriff Baker and a few men rode out after you told me what happened before you passed out. I don't recall if you remember saying anything." She didn't remember speaking to anyone, but apparently she had. "The others," he shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry, miss." Tears welled in her eyes, but Catharine fought them back. She had cried enough over the past months. Tears wouldn't bring back the dead or change her circumstances. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Lawson, but I must impose on you no further." She tried again to sit up, more slowly this time. "And where exactly do you plan on going, miss?" He left the question hanging. "Valmont, Catharine Valmont." She hesitated, the magnitude of her situation crashing down upon her. Her money, her letters of introduction, her luggage all taken by the bandits. She had nothing and no one. I'm not certain. I was traveling to San Francisco to take a position as a governess. Well, Miss Valmont, you're in no condition to travel anywhere right now. You need rest. Russell stood, his tall frame nearly touching the low ceiling of the room. The bed is yours for as long as you need it. I've got a cot I can use. Catharine's pride bristled at the charity, but she had no alternatives. I insist on paying you back once I'm able. A hint of a smile touched his lips. We'll figure something out. For now, rest. He left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Despite her determination to stay awake and plan her next move, exhaustion claimed Catharine within minutes. She slept through the rest of the day and into the night, waking only briefly when Russell returned to check on her, helping her drink more water before she drifted off again. When she finally woke properly, sunlight was streaming through the small window, and the sounds of the town going about its business filtered up from below. The door opened, and a young woman with freckles scattered across her nose entered, carrying a basin of water and a bundle of fabric. "Oh, you're awake. I'm Mary Simmons. Russ asked me to bring you some things." She set the basin down on the nightstand. "There's water to wash up, and I brought one of my dresses. It might be a bit short on you, but it'll do until we can get you something better." "That's very kind of you," Catharine said, touched by the thoughtfulness of these strangers. Mary smiled. "Russ said you had a terrible time of it. Town's been talking about nothing else. 3 dead in a stagecoach robbery and you walking all that way in this heat. It's a miracle you made it." Catharine wasn't sure she believed in miracles anymore, but she nodded politely. "I'll leave you to wash up. There's a bit of breakfast downstairs when you're ready. Nothing fancy, but Russ makes a decent cup of coffee." After Mary left, Catharine rose slowly, testing her strength. Her body ached, but the overwhelming weakness of the previous day had receded. She washed as best she could with the cold water, grimacing at the grime that came away on the cloth. Her hair was beyond help without a proper bath, but she managed to smooth it back into a simple braid. Mary's dress was indeed too short, the hem hovering inches above her ankles, but the cotton was clean and soft. Catharine was struck by a wave of melancholy as she folded her ruined traveling dress. It had been one of her finer possessions, purchased specifically for her journey west. Now it was just another reminder of all she had lost. The smell of coffee and frying bacon guided her downstairs. The bottom floor of the building was the blacksmith shop, with a forge, anvil, and tools of the trade dominating the space. A small area in the back had been set up as a rudimentary kitchen and living space, with a table and 2 chairs, a cupboard, and a wood stove. Russell stood at the stove, his back to her as he turned bacon in a cast iron skillet. He'd clearly heard her footsteps on the stairs, for he spoke without turning around. "Hope you're hungry. Wasn't sure what you like, so I kept it simple." "Anything would be welcome," Catharine said, awkwardly hovering in the doorway between the shop and the living area. He glanced over his shoulder, his expression warming slightly when he saw her up and dressed. "Sit. Coffee's hot." Catharine sat at the small table where 2 tin cups of steaming coffee waited. She wrapped her hands around one, savoring the warmth. Russell brought over 2 plates, each with bacon and a thick slice of bread. He sat across from her, his large frame making the chair look almost comically small. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson, for everything," he nodded, clearly uncomfortable with gratitude. "Russell's fine, or Russ?" "Russell, then." She took a sip of the coffee, which was indeed decent, if stronger than she was accustomed to. "I don't know what I would have done if I'd collapsed elsewhere. Independence isn't a big place, but we look after our own." He paused, seeming to realize what he'd said. "And those who need looking after." They ate in silence for a few minutes. Catharine found herself studying her host surreptitiously. In the light of day, She could see that he was younger than she'd initially thought, probably in his early 30s. His hair was a dark blonde, cut shorter on the sides but longer on top, with a slight wave to it. His face was tanned from working outdoors, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he squinted in the sun often. A short beard, a shade darker than his hair, covered his jaw. "Sheriff wants to talk to you when you're feeling up to it," Russell said eventually. "About the robbery." Catharine nodded, setting down her fork. "Of course. He's a good man, Baker. Fair." Russell drained his coffee cup. "I told him I'd bring you over when you were ready." "I can go now," Catharine said, pushing her half-eaten breakfast aside. Russell studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Finish your coffee first. No rush." As Catharine drank the last of her coffee, she became acutely aware of her precarious situation. She was completely dependent on the kindness of strangers in a town she'd never intended to visit, with no money and no possessions. "I need to find work," she said abruptly. "I can't impose on you indefinitely. Like I said, no rush. You've had a shock. Nevertheless, I must make arrangements. I was to be a governess in San Francisco, but without my letters of recommendation." She trailed off, the magnitude of her loss washing over her again. Russell stood, taking their plates to a basin of water. "One thing at a time. Talk to the sheriff, then we'll figure out the rest." Independence's sheriff's office was a small wooden building a short walk from the livery stable. Sheriff Elijah Baker was a portly man in his 50s with a bushy gray mustache and kind eyes that belied his gruff manner. He listened intently as Catharine recounted the robbery, taking notes in a leather-bound ledger. "4 men, you say? Any distinguishing features you recall?" Catharine closed her eyes, trying to remember details through the haze of terror. "One had a scar across his cheek here." She traced a line from her left eye to her jaw. "Another wore a red bandana. They wore masks, but I could see that much." Baker nodded. "Matches the description of the Carson gang, been hitting stage coaches and travelers all through the territory." He set down his pencil. "We found your things scattered about, miss, but anything of value was gone. Your trunk was broken open, clothes thrown around." "I see." Catharine swallowed hard. "The other passengers, we buried them proper, don't you worry. Said some words over them." "Thank you," she whispered. Russell, who had been standing quietly by the door throughout the interview, stepped forward. "Anything else you need, Sheriff?" Baker shook his head. "Not for now. Miss Valmont, I'll let you know if we catch these men, though I won't make promises I can't keep. They're likely halfway to Nevada by now." Outside, the summer sun beat down mercilessly. Catharine shielded her eyes, feeling dizzy again. "Easy," Russell said, offering his arm. "Let's get you back to the shade." Instead of returning to the livery, he guided her toward the hotel. "Thought you might like a proper bath. I've arranged it with Mrs. Donovan." The prospect of washing away the grime of her ordeal was so enticing that Catharine didn't even protest the additional charity. The Miners' Rest Hotel was a 2-story wooden structure, more boarding house than hotel, but to Catharine it looked like a palace. Mrs. Donovan, the proprietress, was a widow in her 60s with steel-gray hair and an efficient manner. "Right this way, dear. I've had the girls heat water for you. Take your time, no one will disturb you." The bath was everything Catharine had hoped for. She soaked until the water cooled, washing her hair twice to remove all traces of dust and sweat. Mary had brought over more clothes, a skirt and shirtwaist this time, more suitable for daily wear than the Sunday dress she'd lent earlier. Clean and refreshed, Catharine descended to the hotel's small lobby, where Russell waited, hat in hand. He stood when he saw her, something flickering in his eyes that she couldn't quite identify. "Feel better?" he asked. "Immeasurably. Thank you." Outside, they walked slowly back toward the livery. The town was busier now, with wagons passing through and people going about their business. "I spoke with Widow Jenkins while you were bathing," Russell said. "She runs the boarding house for respectable ladies, has a room available if you'd like it." Catharine stopped walking. "That's very kind, but I have no way to pay for room and board. It's arranged for the week. After that." He shrugged. "Like I said, we take care of our own here." "I'm not one of your own," Catharine reminded him gently. "I'm a stranger passing through." Russell looked down at her, his expression unreadable. Everyone's a stranger until they're not. Before Catharine could respond, a commotion from down the street drew their attention. A group of men on horseback was approaching, dust billowing behind them. As they drew closer, Catharine could see they were cowboys, whooping and hollering as they rode into town. "Peterson's ranch hands," Russell explained, his expression darkening. "Coming in for their monthly entertainment." The cowboys dismounted outside the saloon, tying their horses to the hitching post. One of them, a tall man with a flashy vest, spotted Russell and Catharine and gave a mocking tip of his hat. "If it isn't the blacksmith, and with a lady friend. Upgrading your company, Lawson." Russell's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he placed a protective hand at the small of Catharine's back, guiding her forward. "Ignore them," he muttered. "They're harmless enough when sober. It's when they've been drinking that they cause trouble." The cowboys disappeared into the saloon, but the encounter left Catharine unsettled. She was beginning to realize that life in a frontier town like Independence was very different from the genteel St. Louis society she had left behind. At the livery, Russell had to return to work. "Got shoes to fit on the Thompson mares before sundown," he explained. "Mary will take you to the boarding house. We can talk more at supper if you'd like to join me." Mary was waiting inside, perched on a stool near the forge, chatting animatedly with a young man who must have been Russell's apprentice. She bounced to her feet when they entered. "Ready to see your new home? It's not much, but Mrs. Jenkins keeps it clean, and the other ladies are nice enough." Catharine found herself being whisked away, barely having time to thank Russell before Mary was leading her down the street, chattering about the town and its inhabitants. "Mrs. Jenkins is strict about gentlemen callers, none allowed past the parlor, but she's fair. There are 3 other ladies boarding there now. Miss Parsons, who teaches at the school, Mrs. Whitaker, a widow who does seamstress work, and Miss Thompson, who works at her father's general store." The boarding house was a neat, 2-story building with a small front garden that showed signs of careful tending despite the harsh climate. Inside, it was modestly furnished but spotlessly clean. Mrs. Jenkins, a thin woman with a perpetually worried expression, showed Catharine to a small room on the 2nd floor. "Breakfast at 7, supper at 6, she said crisply. "You're responsible for your own midday meal. No gentlemen above stairs, no spirits, no coming in after 9 o'clock without prior arrangement. Is that understood?" "Yes, madam," Catharine replied, feeling like a schoolgirl again. When Mrs. Jenkins left, Mary helped Catharine settle in, which took almost no time given her lack of possessions. "You'll meet the others at supper," Mary said. "But I should warn you they'll be full of questions. We don't get many newcomers in Independence, especially not lone ladies with mysterious pasts." Catharine smiled weakly. "There's nothing mysterious about me, I assure you. Just unfortunate circumstances." Mary's eyes widened with sudden realization. "Oh, I nearly forgot. Russ wanted me to give you this." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small drawstring bag. "Said it wasn't much, but might help until you get settled." Inside the bag were $3 and a handful of smaller coins. Catharine's eyes filled with tears at the gesture. "I can't accept this." "He said you'd say that." Mary grinned. and told me to tell you it's a loan, not charity, and you can pay him back when you're able." Knowing she had no choice but to accept the help for now, Catharine tucked the money away. "Please thank him for me, and thank you, Mary, for your kindness to a stranger." Mary waved away the gratitude. "Russ is like a big brother to me. Any friend of his is a friend of mine." She headed for the door. "Remember, supper at 6, and Russ is expecting you at the livery after." Left alone, Catharine sat on the narrow bed, the events of the past days crashing over her like waves. She had traveled west to escape painful memories and start anew, only to lose everything in a violent attack that had nearly claimed her life as well. And yet, here she was, in a town she'd never heard of before, surrounded by strangers who had shown her more kindness in 2 days than she had experienced in months in St. Louis. At precisely 6 o'clock, Catharine made her way downstairs to the dining room, where a long table was set for 5. Mrs. Jenkins and 2 other women were already seated. "Ah, Miss Valmont," Mrs. Jenkins said. "Allow me to introduce Miss Parsons and Mrs. Whittaker. Miss Thompson is usually late." Grace Parsons was a plump, cheerful woman in her 40s with spectacles perched on her nose. She taught at the town's small school and immediately began peppering Catharine with questions about her education and background. Harriet Whittaker was older, perhaps in her late 50s, with skillful hands that never stopped moving, even at the table where she worked on a piece of mending. She was quieter, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. They were joined shortly by Abigail Thompson, a pretty young woman of about 20 who apologized breathlessly for her tardiness. "Father had a shipment come in late and I couldn't leave until we'd checked everything." Throughout the simple but filling meal of stew and biscuits, Catharine answered questions about herself as vaguely as she could without seeming rude. Yes, she was from St. Louis. Yes, she had been traveling to San Francisco for work. No, she had no family in California. No, she wasn't sure how long she would stay in Independence. "Well, we're glad to have you, however temporary your stay might be," Miss Parsons said kindly. "And if you need work, I could use an assistant at the school. Many of the children have fallen behind with their lessons since Miss Green left to get married." Catharine brightened at the prospect. "I would be most grateful for the opportunity. I was to be a governess in San Francisco, so I have experience with education." "Wonderful. We can discuss the details tomorrow." After supper, Catharine excused herself, explaining that she was expected elsewhere. Mrs. Whittaker raised an eyebrow but said nothing, while Miss Thompson giggled behind her hand. "The blacksmith is quite a catch, you know," Miss Thompson whispered as Catharine was leaving. "Half the unmarried women in town have set their caps for him, but he barely seems to notice." Embarrassed, Catharine hurried out, making her way back to the livery as the evening shadows lengthened. The shop portion was closed up for the night, but light spilled from the windows of the living quarters upstairs. She hesitated at the bottom of the external staircase, suddenly unsure of the propriety of visiting a bachelor's quarters alone, even if she had spent the previous night there while ill. Before she could decide whether to leave, the door at the top of the stairs opened and Russell looked down at her. "Thought I heard someone," he said. "Come on up." The small living space had been tidied since breakfast. A pot of something savory smelling bubbled on the stove, and the table was set with 2 plates. "I know you've had supper," Russell said, suddenly looking uncertain, "but thought you might like some coffee and maybe a slice of Mrs. Donovan's apple pie. She sends one over sometimes." "That sounds lovely," Catharine said, touched by his thoughtfulness. They sat across from each other at the small table, the pie between them remaining momentarily untouched as Russell poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "I wanted to thank you properly," Catharine began, "for everything you've done. The money, The room at the boarding house, taking care of me when I was ill. Russell cut her off with a shake of his head. No need for thanks. Nevertheless, you have them, and I will repay you as soon as I'm able. Miss Parsons has offered me work at the school. A smile briefly crossed his face. Grace is good people. You'll like working with her. I hope so. Catharine hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at her. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. I could be anyone. Russell considered the question, taking a sip of his coffee before answering. When I came west, I had nothing but the clothes on my back and my skill with metal. Got robbed 3 times between St. Louis and California. Would have starved if not for the kindness of strangers. He shrugged. Just passing it on, I suppose. There was more to the story, Catharine sensed, but she didn't press. Everyone in the West seemed to have parts of their past they preferred not to discuss. She certainly did. Well, I'm grateful, regardless of your reasons. Russell cut the pie, sliding a slice onto her plate. Try this. Mrs. Donovan might look like she'd rather hit you with a broom than bake you a pie, but she's got a gift with pastry. The pie was indeed delicious, the apples spiced perfectly with cinnamon and nutmeg. Catharine found herself relaxing as they ate, the tension of the past days slowly ebbing away. Those cowboys, she said after a while. The ones we saw earlier, you don't care for them. Russell's expression darkened. The Peterson outfit, they work for the biggest rancher in the valley. Think they own the town because Peterson has money and influence. They seem to know you. We've had our differences. His tone suggested he wouldn't elaborate, but after a moment he continued. Their foreman, Wade Sutton, the one who spoke to us, he and I have history, best left in the past. Catharine nodded, not pressing further. She understood the desire to leave certain things unspoken. They finished their pie in companionable silence. As Catharine prepared to leave, Russell handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. What's this? Just a few things you might need. Soap, hairpins, a comb. Mary helped pick them out. Catharine's throat tightened with emotion. It was such a small thing, yet so thoughtful. Thank you, she whispered. Russell looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. It's nothing. I'll walk you back to the boarding house. It's getting dark. The evening air had cooled, a relief after the heat of the day. They walked side by side, not touching, yet Catharine was acutely aware of Russell's presence beside her, tall and solid in the gathering dusk. At the boarding house gate, she turned to face him. Good night, Russell. And thank you again. He touched the brim of his hat. Good night, Miss Valmont. Catharine, she corrected. If I'm to call you Russell, you should call me Catharine. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Catharine, then, sleep well. She watched him walk away, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the last light of day, before turning to enter the boarding house, where Mrs. Jenkins was waiting to lock up for the night. Later, alone in her small room, Catharine unwrapped Russell's gift. Inside were exactly the items he had mentioned, along with a small bottle of lavender water, a luxury she had not expected. Touched by the gesture, she carefully arranged her few possessions on the dresser, trying not to dwell on all she had lost. As she prepared for bed, Catharine realized something surprising. For the first time in months, she felt safe. The next morning, Catharine rose early, eager to begin her new position at the school. She dressed in Mary's borrowed clothes, grateful that they were plain enough to be suitable for teaching. After a breakfast of porridge and strong tea with the other boarders, she set out with Miss Parsons for the schoolhouse. The building was small but well-maintained, with 2 classrooms and a bell tower. Inside, desks were arranged in neat rows, a large blackboard dominating the front wall. We have about 30 students altogether, Miss Parsons explained, showing Catharine around. Ages 5 to 16, though the older boys often leave schooling behind once they're able to work full-time. I take the older children, while you'll handle the younger ones' basic letters, numbers, reading, and writing." Catharine nodded, feeling a flutter of nervousness. She had tutored children before, but never had sole responsibility for a classroom. "Don't worry," Miss Parsons said, noting her expression. "They're good children mostly. A bit wild sometimes, but that's to be expected out here." The students began arriving at 8 o'clock, a mix of town children and those from outlying farms and ranches. They eyed Catharine with curiosity as Miss Parsons introduced her, some of the younger ones openly staring at the newcomer. "Miss Valmont will be teaching the primary class," Miss Parsons announced. "I expect you to show her the same respect you show me." A small boy in the front row raised his hand. "Are you the lady that got robbed by bandits and walked all the way to town?" Catharine was startled by the direct question, but before she could respond, Miss Parsons intervened. "Thomas Johnson, that is not an appropriate question for your new teacher. 5 minutes of silent reflection for you." The boy's face fell, but he nodded solemnly. The morning passed quickly as Catharine assessed her students' abilities and began establishing a routine. She had 12 children, aged 5 to 10, with varying levels of education. Some could already read simple texts, while others were just learning their letters. By lunchtime, she had gained a reasonable understanding of each child's needs and had begun to earn their trust. During the midday break, Miss Parsons joined Catharine on the schoolhouse steps, sharing her packed lunch of bread and cheese. "You're a natural teacher," she observed. "The children have taken to you already." "They're eager to learn," Catharine replied. "That makes it easier." Miss Parsons hesitated before continuing. "I feel I should warn you about something. The school board, which consists of the town's prominent businessmen, must approve all teachers. They'll want to meet with you, ask about your background, your qualifications." "I understand." Catharine felt a twinge of unease. "When will this meeting take place?" "Tomorrow evening at the town hall. Don't worry too much. They're generally reasonable men." The afternoon session went as smoothly as the morning. By the time the last student had been dismissed, Catharine was tired but satisfied with her first day. She had just finished cleaning the blackboard when she heard the schoolhouse door open. Russell stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Thought you might like some company walking back to town," he said, looking slightly uncomfortable. Catharine smiled, genuinely pleased to see him. "That would be nice, thank you." Miss Parsons, who was gathering her own things, gave Catharine a knowing look that made her blush. "I'll see you tomorrow, Miss Valmont," she said with a hint of amusement in her voice. "Don't forget about the board meeting." Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley. Russell took Catharine's small bundle of books and papers, tucking them under his arm as they began walking. "How was your first day?" he asked. "Better than I expected. The children are eager to learn, even if some of them would rather be elsewhere." Russell nodded. "Most folks here understand the value of education, even if they didn't have much themselves." They walked in companionable silence for a while, the dusty road stretching before them. In the distance, the mountains stood sentinel, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. "It's beautiful here," Catharine said softly. "I never expected to find such beauty in a place so harsh." Russell glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "It grows on you. Takes a certain kind of person to see past the hardship to the beauty beneath." "Is that why you stayed?" "The beauty." He was quiet for so long that Catharine thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Partly. Mostly it was about finding a place where I could build something of my own, be judged for my work, not my past." Before Catharine could respond, The sound of rapidly approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A group of riders was coming up fast behind them, dust billowing in their wake. As they drew closer, Catharine recognized Wade Sutton and the other Peterson ranch hands. Russell tensed beside her, moving slightly so that he stood between her and the approaching riders. The cowboys slowed their horses as they reached Catharine and Russell, circling around them in a display of horsemanship that seemed designed to intimidate. "Well, well," Sutton drawled, his gaze fixed on Catharine. "The new schoolmarm, I presume. Seems our little town is getting prettier by the day." "Miss Valmont is heading back to town," Russell said, his voice level but with an underlying tension that Catharine could feel. "We'd appreciate being left to continue our walk in peace." Sutton dismounted, handing his reins to one of the other cowboys. He was tall, nearly as tall as Russell, with dark hair and a carefully trimmed mustache. His clothes were finer than those of the other ranch hands, marking him as their foreman. "Just being neighborly, Lawson," he said, approaching them. He tipped his hat to Catharine. "Wade Sutton, madam, foreman at the Peterson ranch. We haven't been properly introduced." "Catharine Valmont," she replied coolly, not offering her hand. Something about the man set her on edge despite his outward show of courtesy. "Miss Valmont is the new assistant teacher at the school," Russell said. "And she's had a long day, if you'll excuse us." Sutton stepped closer, deliberately invading their space. "Heard you had some trouble on the road," he said to Catharine. "Stagecoach robbery, terrible business. You're lucky to have survived." The way he emphasized lucky made Catharine's skin crawl. There was something predatory in his gaze, a calculation that went beyond mere curiosity. "Yes, I was fortunate," she replied stiffly. Sutton's eyes narrowed slightly. "Funny thing, those robberies, always happening on that stretch of road. Almost like someone's got advance information about who's traveling and what they're carrying." Russell's hand moved to Catharine's elbow, guiding her forward. "We need to be going." "Good day, Sutton." Sutton stepped aside, but his voice followed them. "You ever need anything, Miss Valmont, anything at all, you just send word to the Peterson ranch. I'd be happy to be of service." Catharine didn't look back, but she could feel the men's eyes on her as she and Russell continued down the road. Only when they were well out of earshot did Russell speak. "I apologize for that. Sutton enjoys making people uncomfortable." "He seemed particularly interested in making you uncomfortable," Catharine observed. Russell's jaw tightened. "Like I said, we have history." He implied something about the robbery, about advance information. "Sutton talks just to hear himself speak. Pay him no mind." But Catharine couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the encounter than Russell was admitting. The way Sutton had looked at her, the insinuation about the robberies, it left her unsettled. They reached the boarding house just as the dinner bell was ringing. Russell handed Catharine her books and papers. "Thank you for walking with me," she said. "My pleasure." He hesitated. "There's a social at the church Saturday evening. Whole town attends. Thought you might like to go, get to know more people." Catharine was touched by the invitation. "I'd like that." A rare smile lit his face, transforming his features. "I'll come by at 7 then." As Catharine watched him walk away, Mrs. Jenkins appeared in the doorway behind her. "Dinner's getting cold, Miss Valmont," she said pointedly. "And I don't hold with keeping the other boarders waiting." Catharine hurried inside, aware of the curious glances from the other women as she took her seat at the table. News traveled fast in a small town, and her association with Russell Lawson had clearly not gone unnoticed. During dinner, Miss Thompson leaned across the table. "Is it true the Peterson foreman tried to court you on the road today?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Certainly not," Catharine replied, startled by the question. Mr. Sutton and some other ranch hands passed us on the road and exchanged a few words with us, that's all. Mrs. Whittaker sniffed disapprovingly. Wade Sutton is trouble. You do well to keep your distance, young lady. He has a reputation with women that is less than gentlemanly. Harriet, Mrs. Jenkins chided, such talk is inappropriate at the dinner table. Better inappropriate talk than an innocent young woman being led astray, Mrs. Whittaker retorted, but she subsided, returning her attention to her meal. The exchange left Catharine wondering just what kind of man Wade Sutton was, and what history he shared with Russell that created such tension between them. The next day passed in a blur of lessons and preparations for the school board meeting. Catharine was nervous, aware that her continued employment depended on making a good impression on the town's prominent men. The meeting was held in the small town hall, a building that served multiple purposes for the community. 5 men sat behind a long table. Mayor Harrison, a portly businessman with mutton chop sideburns, Reverend Phillips, the town's Presbyterian minister, Mr. Thompson, Abigail's father and owner of the general store, Dr. Pearson, the town physician who had checked on Catharine when she was ill, and to her surprise, James Peterson, the rancher who employed Wade Sutton. Peterson was a tall, lean man in his 60s, with silver hair and cold gray eyes. He nodded curtly to Catharine as she entered, but there was no warmth in the gesture. The questioning began immediately, with Mayor Harrison taking the lead. Miss Valmont, we understand you were traveling to San Francisco to take a position as a governess when you had the misfortune to be robbed. Yes, sir, Catharine replied. I had letters of recommendation from my previous employers in St. Louis, but they were taken along with my other possessions. Convenient, Peterson murmured, just loudly enough to be heard. Reverend Phillips frowned at the rancher before turning to Catharine. Can you tell us about your education and experience, Miss Valmont? Catharine outlined her background. Educated at a ladies' seminary in Philadelphia, employed as a governess for 2 prominent St. Louis families over the past 5 years. She answered questions about her teaching methods, her views on discipline, and her religious beliefs. Throughout the interview, she was aware of Peterson watching her with a calculating gaze that reminded her uncomfortably of Sutton's. When the formal questioning ended, he spoke up. You're a young, unmarried woman traveling alone across the country, he said. Some might find that unusual. What brought you west, really? The implication was clear. Respectable women didn't travel alone without good reason. Catharine felt her cheeks flush with anger, but she kept her voice steady. My parents died 2 years ago, Mr. Peterson. There was nothing keeping me in St. Louis, and I received an advantageous offer from a family in San Francisco. I assure you, my reasons for traveling west were entirely proper. Dr. Pearson cleared his throat. I think we've asked enough personal questions. Miss Parsons speaks highly of Miss Valmont's teaching abilities, and that should be our primary concern. After a brief discussion among the board members, Mayor Harrison announced that Catharine was approved as an assistant teacher on a provisional basis, to be reviewed after 1 month. As the meeting adjourned, Peterson approached Catharine. Up close, she could see the family resemblance to his foreman not in looks, but in the cold calculation behind his eyes. Miss Valmont, he said, his voice surprisingly soft. I hope you'll forgive my directness. We've had unfortunate experiences with newcomers in the past. I'm simply looking out for the town's best interests. Of course, Catharine replied, not believing him for a moment. You seem to have made friends quickly. Russell Lawson in particular. The mention of Russell sent a prickle of unease down Catharine's spine. Mr. Lawson has been kind enough to help a stranger in need, as have many in Independence, Peterson smiled thinly. Indeed. Well, welcome to our little community, Miss Valmont. I hope your stay is illuminating. He turned and left, leaving Catharine with the distinct impression that she had just been threatened, though she couldn't have explained exactly how. Outside, she was relieved to find Russell waiting for her, leaning against a hitching post with his arms crossed. "How did it go?" he asked, falling into step beside her as she began walking toward the boarding house. "I've been approved provisionally." She hesitated, then added, "Mr. Peterson seemed skeptical of my credentials." Russell's expression darkened. "Peterson likes to think he runs this town. Owns most of the land in the valley, employs a lot of men, gives him influence." "He mentioned you," Catharine said cautiously. "Seemed interested in our friendship." A muscle twitched in Russell's jaw. "Peterson and I have had our differences over the years." "Everyone seems to speak in euphemisms about you and the Petersons," Catharine observed. "Differences. History. What happened between you?" Russell was silent for so long that Catharine thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he sighed. "It's a long story and not one for a public street. Come by the livery tomorrow after school. I'll tell you then." The promise of an explanation had to be enough for now. They walked the rest of the way in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. At the boarding house gate, Russell bid her good night with a touch of his hat, his expression still troubled. Catharine watched him go, wondering what secrets lay in his past, and why James Peterson had seemed so interested in her connection to him. The next day dragged interminably. Catharine found it hard to focus on her lessons, her mind constantly returning to Russell and the promised explanation. When the final bell rang and the students had been dismissed, she tidied the classroom with unusual haste, earning a knowing smile from Miss Parsons. "Someone's in a hurry," the older teacher observed. "Would this have anything to do with our blacksmith?" Catharine felt her cheeks warm. Russell offered to explain some things about the town's dynamics. Miss Parsons nodded, her expression growing serious. "The feud between Russell and the Petersons has been going on for years. It's divided the town in some ways, though most folks try to stay neutral." "A feud? Over what?" "That's for Russell to explain, I think. Just remember, there are always two sides to every story." With that cryptic advice, Miss Parsons sent Catharine on her way. The walk to the livery seemed longer than usual, her anticipation making every step feel like a mile. When she arrived, Russell was working at the forge, hammering a piece of glowing metal into shape. The rhythmic clang of his hammer filled the space, sparks flying with each blow. He was stripped to the waist, his skin gleaming with sweat in the forge's light, muscles flexing with each movement. Catharine hesitated in the doorway, suddenly feeling like an intruder. She was about to step back outside when Russell looked up, catching sight of her. He immediately set down his hammer and reached for his shirt, which hung on a peg nearby. "Catharine," he said, pulling the shirt over his head. "Didn't hear you come in." "I'm sorry to interrupt your work," she said, still hovering in the doorway. "Not at all." He gestured toward the stairs. "Let's go up where we can talk properly." In the small living area above the shop, Russell busied himself making coffee while Catharine sat at the table, her hands folded in her lap. Now that the moment for explanations had arrived, she felt strangely nervous. Russell set 2 cups of coffee on the table and sat across from her, his expression grave. "What do you know about James Peterson?" he asked. "Very little. He's a rancher, wealthy and influential. He employs Wade Sutton, who seems to have some personal animosity toward you." Russell nodded. "Peterson came to Owens Valley in the early 50s, before the war. Built the biggest cattle operation in the eastern Sierra. When I arrived in '63, he already owned most of the grazing land from here to the Nevada line." He took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. I came west with nothing but my skills and dreams of land of my own. Worked as a smith in mining camps, saved every penny. By 65, I'd saved enough to buy a small plot north of town, good water, decent grazing. I was going to raise horses. Catharine could hear the pain in his voice, though he tried to hide it. What happened? Peterson happened. Claimed the water rights to the creek that ran through my land. Without water, the land was worthless. We took it to court in Independence. Judge ruled in Peterson's favor, not surprising, considering Peterson had appointed him. That's terrible, Catharine said softly. Russell's eyes hardened. It gets worse. I refused to sell to Peterson, thought I could find another way to make the land work. One night, my cabin burned down with all my possessions inside. I was in town, or I'd have burned with it. You think Peterson was responsible? I know he was. Couldn't prove it, of course. Sheriff at the time, not Baker, his predecessor, said it was probably an accident. But a week later, Wade Sutton approached me with an offer from Peterson to buy the land for half what I'd paid for it. Catharine's hand went to her mouth. That's criminal. That's business, according to Peterson. Russell's knuckles were white around his coffee cup. I still refused to sell. A month later, the horses I was keeping in town, 3 fine mares I was planning to breed, were poisoned. Again, no proof, but everyone knew. What did you do? Russell's expression was grim. Something I'm not proud of. I confronted Sutton in the saloon, accused him publicly. He drew on me. Catharine's eyes widened. He tried to shoot you, he tried. I was faster. Russell's voice was flat, emotionless. Shot him in the shoulder. Not fatal, obviously, but he still carries the scar. Peterson wanted me arrested for attempted murder, but too many people had seen Sutton draw first. It was self-defense, plain and simple. And since then, it's been a Cold War. Peterson can't touch me legally, but he makes sure I don't forget he's there. His men avoid my services, encourage others to do the same. Fortunately, I'm the only blacksmith for 20 miles, so most folks can't afford to hold grudges. Catharine sat back, processing the story. It explained so much about the undercurrents she had sensed in town, the way people watched Russell and whispered about him. And your land, she asked. Still mine. Sitting empty, useless without water, but I won't give Peterson the satisfaction of getting what he wants. The story filled Catharine with a mixture of admiration for Russell's determination and concern for the enemies he had made. Isn't it dangerous, continuing to defy him? Russell shrugged. Peterson's careful. He won't move against me openly again, not after the incident with Sutton, and I've made friends here, people who watch my back. Like Sheriff Baker. Baker's a good man. Came to town after the shooting. He enforces the law fairly, doesn't play favorites. Peterson can't buy him, which frustrates him to no end. Catharine hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering her since the board meeting. Why was Peterson so interested in me, in our friendship? Russell's eyes met hers, his expression softening slightly. Peterson uses people's connections against them. If he thinks you're important to me, he might try to use you to get to me. The implication that she was important to Russell made Catharine's heart beat a little faster, but she focused on the more concerning aspect of his statement. Use me how? I don't know, but I want you to be careful. Peterson plays a long game, and he doesn't care who gets hurt along the way. The warning should have frightened her, but strangely, it had the opposite effect. After months of feeling alone and adrift, the idea that someone cared enough about her safety to warn her was oddly comforting. Thank you for telling me, she said. For trusting me with this. Russell nodded, still holding her gaze. You deserve to know what you might be walking into by associating with me. Are you suggesting I shouldn't? I'm suggesting you should have all the facts before you decide. Catharine considered his words carefully. I appreciate your concern, but I make my own decisions about who I associate with. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I'm beginning to see that. The tension in the room shifted, the heaviness of their conversation giving way to something lighter, yet somehow more charged. Catharine became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the way Russell's eyes lingered on her face. The moment was broken by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. They both stood quickly, putting a respectable distance between them as Mary burst into the room. Russ. Oh, Miss Valmont, you're here too. Good. Mary was practically bouncing with excitement. Have you heard? There's going to be a real professional theatrical company performing in Independence next week. They're putting up posters all over town. Russell raised an eyebrow. A theatrical company. Out here. They're traveling from San Francisco to Denver, stopping in towns along the way. The mayor's letting them use the town hall for 2 performances. Mary's eyes were shining. They're doing Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet. Catharine couldn't help smiling at the girl's enthusiasm. That sounds wonderful. Will you come with us? Mary asked. It's on Tuesday evening. Russ never wants to go to these things, but I bet he would if you asked him. Russell looked uncomfortable, but before he could respond, Catharine said, I would love to attend. Perhaps we could all go together. Mary clapped her hands. Perfect. I'll tell Father to get tickets for all of us. As Mary chattered on about the upcoming performance, Catharine caught Russell's eye. He gave her a rueful smile that made her heart skip a beat. For the first time since arriving in Independence, Catharine found herself looking forward to something with genuine excitement. The prospect of an evening at the theater and in Russell's company was unexpectedly thrilling. The days leading up to the theatrical performance were busy ones for Catharine. Between teaching and preparing lessons, she had little free time. She saw Russell occasionally. He would sometimes walk her home from the schoolhouse, or they would exchange brief greetings when passing on the street, but their interactions were limited and always in public. The Saturday social at the church was a simple affair, with families bringing dishes to share and musicians playing for dancing afterward. Russell had been quiet during the meal, seeming uncomfortable with the social niceties, but he surprised Catharine by asking her to dance when the music began. I'm not much of a dancer, he admitted as they joined the other couples. Neither am I, Catharine confessed. At least, not the kind of dancing they do out here. Russell's large hand rested lightly at her waist, his other hand holding hers as they moved to the lively fiddle music. He was more graceful than he had led her to believe, guiding her through the simple steps with ease. You've been settling in well, he observed as they circled the floor. The children seem to like you. They're wonderful students, eager to learn. Catharine smiled up at him. I never expected to find such satisfaction in teaching, but I truly enjoy it. It suits you. The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. As they danced, Catharine was aware of eyes watching them, some curious, some approving, some less so. She caught sight of Wade Sutton standing near the door, his gaze cold as it followed them across the floor. Russell noticed her distraction. Ignore him, he said quietly. He only came to report back to Peterson. The music ended, and Russell escorted her back to the side of the room where Mary was waiting with barely contained excitement. You two looked so handsome together, she gushed, like something from a novel. Catharine felt her cheeks warm. It was just a dance, Mary. But the knowing look in the younger woman's eyes suggested she wasn't fooled. The truth was, Catharine was finding it increasingly difficult to pretend that her feelings for Russell were merely friendly. There was something about his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity in the face of Peterson's machinations, that drew her to him. The night of the theatrical performance arrived, bringing with it an air of excitement that seemed to infect the entire town. The town hall had been transformed, with rows of chairs facing a makeshift stage. Posters announcing the majestic players present William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet were pasted on the walls, alongside paintings of dramatic scenes that bore only a passing resemblance to the actual play. Russell met Catharine at the boarding house, looking uncomfortable in his best shirt and newly polished boots. Mary and her father joined them, and they walked together to the town hall, joining the stream of people heading for the performance. Inside, the hall was already crowded. They found their seats near the front, thanks to Mr. Thompson's influence as a member of the town council. Catharine was conscious of Russell beside her, his large frame making the small wooden chair look like a child's seat. Their shoulders brushed occasionally, sending a thrill through her that had nothing to do with the approaching performance. The majestic players turned out to be a troupe of 6 actors who played multiple roles, with minimal costume changes and even more minimal scenery. Their interpretation of Shakespeare was enthusiastic if not entirely faithful to the original text, but what they lacked in sophistication they made up for in energy. During the balcony scene, Catharine found herself stealing glances at Russell. He was watching the stage with an expression of bemused concentration, as if trying to follow the archaic language but not entirely succeeding. When Romeo declared his love for Juliet, Russell's eyes shifted, meeting Catharine's. Something passed between them in that moment, an unspoken acknowledgement that made her breath catch. The performance ended to enthusiastic applause, the audience on their feet as the actors took their bows. As they filed out of the hall into the cool night air, Mary was bubbling over with excitement. Wasn't it magnificent? So romantic. Though I still don't understand why they had to die at the end. Couldn't they have just run away together? Mr. Thompson chuckled at his daughter's critique. That's not the way the story goes, Abigail. It's a tragedy, not a fairy tale. Well, I think it would be better with a happy ending, Mary insisted. They walked Mary and her father back to their home above the general store, then continued on toward the boarding house. For the first time, Catharine and Russell were truly alone, without the buffer of Mary's chatter or the constraints of a public gathering. "Did you enjoy the performance?" Catharine asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "It was." "Interesting," Russell replied diplomatically. "Not my usual entertainment, but I can see why people appreciate it." Catharine smiled. "You didn't understand a word, did you?" A short laugh escaped him. "Not many know, but I liked watching you watch it. You knew all the lines." "I studied Shakespeare at school," she admitted. "Romeo and Juliet was always a favorite, despite the ending." "You agree with Mary, then? You'd prefer a happy ending?" Catharine considered the question. "I think there's value in tragedy. It reminds us that love, even when it ends in sorrow, is still worth experiencing." Russell was quiet for a moment. "That's a brave way of looking at it." "Is it? I've always thought it practical. To avoid love for fear of loss seems a greater tragedy than losing love itself." They had reached the boarding house gate, but neither made a move to open it. Instead, they stood facing each other in the moonlight, the rest of the world fading away. "Catharine," Russell began, his voice lower than usual. Miss Valmont," the sharp voice of Mrs. Jenkins shattered the moment. She stood in the doorway of the boarding house, her silhouette rigid with disapproval. "It's well past 9 o'clock, she said pointedly. "I was about to lock up for the night," Catharine sighed. "I should go in." Russell nodded, stepping back. "Of course." "Good night, Catharine." "Good night, Russell." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Catharine couldn't help but wonder what Russell had been about to say before Mrs. Jenkins interrupted. The look in his eyes had been intense, almost vulnerable. For a man who kept his emotions so carefully guarded, that moment of openness was significant. Lying in bed later, she replayed their conversation about love and loss. It had been philosophical on the surface, but Catharine sensed a deeper meaning beneath the words. Russell had lost so much his dreams of a horse ranch, his property's value, nearly his life. And yet, he remained in independence, refusing to be driven away by Peterson's intimidation. That kind of determination spoke of a strength of character that Catharine found increasingly attractive. As she drifted off to sleep, her thoughts were filled with images of Russell not as the taciturn blacksmith the town saw, but as the man he revealed himself to be when they were alone together. The next morning, Catharine woke to the sound of raised voices downstairs. She dressed quickly and made her way to the parlor, where Mrs. Jenkins was engaged in a heated conversation with Sheriff Baker. "Completely inappropriate to call at this hour," Mrs. Jenkins was saying. "The ladies are barely dressed for the day." "I apologize for the intrusion, madam," Baker replied, "but this is official business. I need to speak with Miss Valmont immediately." Catharine stepped forward. "I'm here, Sheriff." "What's happened?" Baker's expression was grave. "There's been another stagecoach robbery, miss. Same stretch of road where you were attacked. 3 dead, including a woman and child." Catharine's hand went to her throat. "How terrible!" "The reason I'm here," Baker continued, "is that we caught one of the bandits. He was wounded in the robbery and left behind by his companions. He's at the doctor's office now, but he won't last long." "I don't understand," Catharine said. "What does this have to do with me? Before he passes, I need you to identify him. See if he's one of the men who attacked your stagecoach." The thought of facing one of the men who had murdered her fellow passengers made Catharine's stomach churn, but she nodded. "Of course. I'll come right away." Mrs. Jenkins protested, but Catharine was already reaching for her shawl. "This is important, Mrs. Jenkins. Those people deserve justice, just as my fellow travelers did." Outside, a small crowd had gathered, news of the robbery already spreading through the town. Baker offered Catharine his arm as they made their way to Dr. Pearson's office, a small building near the center of town. Inside, the sharp smell of antiseptic and blood filled the air. Dr. Pearson met them in the small waiting room, his expression somber. "He's conscious, but barely," he told Baker. "Lost too much blood. I've done what I can, but it's only a matter of time." "Is he able to speak?" Baker asked. "In moments of lucidity. He's been mumbling about the boss and the plan, but nothing coherent." Baker turned to Catharine. "Are you ready, Miss Valmont? This won't be pleasant." Catharine steeled herself. "I'm ready." The wounded bandit lay on a narrow examination table, his face ashen, a blood-stained bandage wrapped around his chest. His eyes were closed, but they flickered open as Catharine and the sheriff entered. Baker stepped forward. "Can you hear me?" The man's eyes focused with effort. "Yeah," he whispered. "This lady was a victim of a stagecoach robbery 2 weeks ago. Same place, same method. Were you involved in that one too?" The bandit's gaze shifted to Catharine, and she felt a chill of recognition. His face had been partially covered during the robbery, but the eyes, she remembered those eyes, cold and calculating as they surveyed the terrified passengers. "It's him," she said quietly. "He was there. He shot the banker." The bandit's cracked lips twisted in what might have been a smile. "Smart, lady," he rasped. "Too smart for her own good." Baker leaned closer. "Who's your boss? Who planned these robberies?" The dying man's eyes shifted back to the sheriff. "Go to hell, you're dying," Baker said bluntly. "Make it right before you go. Tell me who ordered these killings." For a moment, it seemed the bandit would take his secrets to the grave. Then, with what appeared to be his last reserves of strength, he whispered, "Ask." Peterson's man. His eyes closed, his breathing growing more labored. Dr. Pearson stepped forward, checking his pulse. "He's going," he said quietly. "Won't be long now." Baker's expression had hardened at the bandit's words. "Peterson's man," he repeated, "could mean anyone. Half the valley works for Peterson in some capacity." But Catharine knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, exactly who the bandit had meant. The cold calculation in Wade Sutton's eyes when he'd spoken of the robbery, the way he had emphasized how lucky she had been to survive it all made a terrible kind of sense. "Sheriff," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I believe he was referring to Wade Sutton." Baker's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Valmont. Do you have any evidence beyond this man's dying words?" "No," she admitted. "Only a feeling. The way Sutton spoke to me about the robbery. He seemed to know details that weren't common knowledge." The sheriff rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "I can't arrest a man on a feeling, especially not Peterson's foreman, but I'll keep a closer eye on Sutton from now on." Outside, Baker escorted Catharine back toward the boarding house. "I'd appreciate if you kept this conversation to yourself, Miss Valmont. If Sutton is involved, I don't want to tip him off that we suspect anything." "Of course," Catharine agreed, "though I should tell Russell. He warned me about Sutton." Baker hesitated, then nodded. "Lawson's got good instincts, and he's involved now, whether we like it or not, through his connection to you." The implication that she and Russell shared a connection might have pleased Catharine under different circumstances. Now, it only heightened her concern. If Sutton was indeed behind the stagecoach robberies, and if he perceived Catharine as important to Russell, she might be in danger. Baker seemed to read her thoughts. "Don't worry too much, Miss Valmont. Independence is a small town. Hard to do anything without someone noticing, and I'll have my deputy keep an extra eye on the boarding house, just to be safe." His reassurance did little to calm Catharine's nerves. As they reached the boarding house, she spotted a familiar figure waiting by the gate. Russell, his expression tense as he paced back and forth. He stopped when he saw them, relief washing over his features. "Catharine, I heard about the robbery and that Baker had taken you to identify a suspect." Baker nodded to Russell. "She was a great help. The bandit confirmed she was present at the earlier robbery and he made some interesting statements before he passed." Russell's gaze sharpened. "What kind of statements?" Baker glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "He implicated someone in Peterson's employ as the mastermind behind the robberies." "Sutton," Russell said immediately. "It has to be." "That's my thinking," Baker agreed. "But thinking isn't proof. I need evidence before I can move against someone with Peterson's protection." Russell's jaw tightened. "And in the meantime, Catharine could be in danger." "I've already promised to have my deputy keep an eye on the boarding house," Baker said. "And Miss Valmont is rarely alone. Between teaching, church, and social activities, she's almost always in public." "Almost isn't good enough," Russell insisted. "If Sutton thinks she can identify him as being involved in the robberies—" "I understand your concern, Lawson," Baker interrupted, "but let me handle this. The last thing we need is for you to take matters into your own hands and give Peterson a reason to move against you legally." The warning was clear, and Russell reluctantly nodded. "Just make sure your deputy stays alert." After the sheriff left, Russell turned to Catharine. "Are you all right? Seeing that man must have been difficult." "I'm fine," she assured him, though in truth the experience had left her shaken. It was unsettling to see him, to remember that day, but if it helps catch those responsible, it was worth it. Russell's expression softened. "You're stronger than you look, Catharine Valmont." The compliment warmed her. "I've had to be." He hesitated, then said, "I'd like to escort you to and from school for a while, just until this is resolved." Part of Catharine wanted to protest that she didn't need protection, that she had been taking care of herself for years. But a larger part recognized the wisdom in Russell's suggestion, and if she was honest with herself, welcomed the opportunity to spend more time in his company. "Thank you," she said. "I would appreciate that." A look of relief crossed his face. "Good. I'll meet you here in the morning then." As he turned to go, Catharine called after him. "Russell," he looked back, "be careful. If Sutton is behind these robberies and if he thinks we suspect him." Russell's mouth curved in a grim smile. "Don't worry about me, Catharine. I've been dealing with Sutton and his kind for years." But as she watched him walk away, Catharine couldn't help but worry. The feud between Russell and the Petersons had already cost him so much. She didn't want to be the cause of further trouble. That night, Catharine slept fitfully, her dreams haunted by images of the dying bandit and the cold calculation in Wade Sutton's eyes. She woke before dawn, exhausted but too restless to return to sleep. Instead, she dressed and went downstairs, hoping to find a book in the parlor to distract her until breakfast. The house was silent, the other boarders still asleep. Catharine lit a small lamp and settled into an armchair with a volume of Tennyson's poetry she found on the bookshelf. She was so engrossed in The Lady of Shalott that she didn't hear the front door open. A hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream before it could form. "Not a sound," a voice hissed in her ear, "or I'll slit your throat right here." Catharine's blood turned to ice as she recognized the voice. Wade Sutton. The sharp edge of a knife pressed against her neck just hard enough to break the skin. A trickle of warm blood ran down her throat. "You're coming with me," Sutton whispered. Nice and quiet. "One wrong move, one sound, and you're dead. Understand?" Catharine nodded minutely, careful not to move against the blade. The hand over her mouth lifted slightly, but the knife remained pressed to her throat. "Good girl. Now we're going to walk out that door and over to my horse. You're going to mount up behind me and we're going to ride out of town. If anyone stops us, you'll smile and say you're taking an early morning ride with me." "Got it." Again, Catharine nodded. Her mind raced, trying to formulate a plan, if she could just make enough noise to wake the house. As if reading her thoughts, Sutton pressed the knife harder against her skin. "Don't even think about it. I've got nothing to lose now, thanks to you and that sheriff. I'll kill you right here if I have to." He pulled her to her feet, the knife never leaving her throat. With his free hand, he extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Then he was pushing her toward the door, his breath hot against her ear. "Move." Catharine had no choice but to obey. Outside, the street was deserted, the first hints of dawn just beginning to lighten the eastern sky. A horse waited at the hitching post, saddled and ready. Sutton forced her toward it, keeping the knife at her throat. "Mount up," he ordered. With trembling hands, Catharine reached for the saddle horn, preparing to pull herself up. It was then that she heard it, the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. "Let her go, Sutton." Russell stood in the middle of the street, a rifle aimed steadily at Sutton's chest. His expression was deadly calm, his eyes cold in the dim light. Sutton froze, then laughed a harsh, bitter sound. "Lawson, always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." He tightened his grip on Catharine, the knife digging deeper. "Drop the rifle or I'll cut her throat." "You'll be dead before she hits the ground," Russell replied evenly. "And we both know it." Catharine could feel Sutton's hesitation, the slight tremor in the hand holding the knife. "You're bluffing," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "I don't bluff, Sutton, not when it comes to killing vermin." Russell took a step closer. "Last chance, let her go." Time seemed to stretch, the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then, with a growl of frustration, Sutton shoved Catharine away from him, sending her sprawling in the dust. In the same motion, he drew his revolver. The rifle cracked, the sound impossibly loud in the pre-dawn stillness. Sutton staggered backward, a look of surprise on his face as he clutched at his chest. His gun dropped from nerveless fingers as he collapsed to his knees, then pitched forward onto his face. Russell was at Catharine's side in an instant, the rifle discarded as he helped her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Just my neck," she managed, her voice shaking. "It's not deep." Lights were coming on in the buildings around them, people emerging to investigate the gunshot. Sheriff Baker appeared from the direction of his office, revolver in hand. "What in blazes?" He stopped short at the sight of Sutton's body in the street. "Lawson, what happened?" Russell kept his arm around Catharine's shoulders, steadying her. "Sutton tried to abduct Miss Valmont. Had a knife to her throat. I gave him a chance to surrender." Baker knelt beside the body, checking for signs of life. Finding none, he stood and holstered his weapon. "Anyone else see what happened?" "I did, Mrs." Jenkins stood in the doorway of the boarding house, a shawl clutched around her nightgown. "I heard voices and looked out my window. Saw that man dragging Miss Valmont out at knife point. Mr. Lawson saved her life." Baker nodded grimly. "That matches what I figured." Sutton must have panicked after yesterday, thought Miss Valmont could identify him as being involved in the robberies. By now, a crowd had gathered, murmuring among themselves at the sight of Peterson's foreman lying dead in the street. "Doctor." Pearson pushed through, immediately moving to examine the cut on Catharine's throat. "It's superficial," he pronounced. "Won't even leave a scar, but you've had a shock. You should rest." Catharine nodded, but her eyes never left Russell's face. He looked calm, almost detached, as if killing a man was something he did every day. But she could see the tension in his jaw, the tightness around his eyes. "Russell," she said softly. "Are you all right?" He looked down at her, something vulnerable flashing in his eyes before being quickly masked. "I'm fine. It's you I'm worried about." Baker was organizing men to move Sutton's body to the undertaker's. He paused beside Russell and Catharine. "Miss Valmont, I'll need a statement from you later. For now, get some rest. Lawson, walk with me." Russell hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave Catharine's side. "Go on," she encouraged him. "I'll be fine. Mrs. Jenkins will stay with me." The older woman nodded firmly, putting a protective arm around Catharine's shoulders. "Come inside, dear. You need hot tea and quiet." As Russell walked away with the sheriff, Catharine allowed Mrs. Jenkins to lead her back into the boarding house. The other boarders were awake now, full of questions that Mrs. Jenkins firmly deflected. "The poor girl has been through enough without being pestered," she declared. "Harriet, make some tea. Abigail, fetch a blanket for the parlor. Grace, see if Dr. Pearson left any salve for that cut." In the parlor, wrapped in a blanket with a cup of hot tea in her hands, Catharine tried to process what had happened. She had come so close to death, or worse, considering what Sutton might have planned for her once they were away from town. If Russell hadn't been there. The thought chilled her. How had he known she was in danger? Why had he been outside the boarding house before dawn? Her questions would have to wait. The shock of the morning's events was catching up to her, making her hands tremble so badly that tea sloshed over the rim of her cup. Mrs. Whittaker gently took it from her, setting it aside. "You should lie down, dear," she said kindly. "The body needs rest after such a fright." Catharine allowed herself to be led upstairs to her room, where she lay down fully dressed on top of the covers. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt Sutton's knife at her throat, heard the crack of Russell's rifle, saw the look of surprise on Sutton's face as he fell. Hours passed. The house quieted as the other boarders went about their day, though someone Mrs. Jenkins probably looked in on her periodically. By mid-afternoon, Catharine had given up on rest and was sitting by her window, watching the street below, when there was a soft knock at her door. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Jenkins with another cup of tea. Instead, it was Russell who entered, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Sheriff Baker said I could see you, to check if you were all right." Catharine rose from her chair, suddenly conscious of her rumpled appearance. "I'm fine, thanks to you." Russell crossed to her in 2 long strides, his hands gentle as they tilted her chin up to examine the cut on her neck. "It's healing well," he said softly. "Another day or 2, it'll be gone completely." His touch lingered, and Catharine found herself leaning into it, drawing strength from his presence. "How did you know?" she asked. "How did you know I was in danger?" Russell's hand dropped away reluctantly. "I couldn't sleep last night. Kept thinking about what the bandit had said, about Sutton's involvement. At dawn, I decided to come check on you, maybe walk with you to breakfast. I was approaching the boarding house when I saw Sutton leading you out at knife point." "You saved my life," Catharine said simply. "Anyone would have done the same." "No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have run for the sheriff or shouted for help. You confronted him directly." Russell looked away. "I couldn't risk waiting, if he'd gotten you on that horse." The unfinished thought hung between them, heavy with implications. Catharine reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Thank you," she whispered. Russell's eyes met hers, and in them she saw a depth of feeling that took her breath away. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, almost reverent, his lips barely brushing hers. But in that brief contact, Catharine felt the walls around her heart, walls she had built after leaving St. Louis, walls reinforced by the trauma of the stagecoach robbery, begin to crumble. When Russell pulled back, his expression was uncertain, as if he feared he had overstepped. Catharine smiled, squeezing his hand reassuringly. "I've wanted to do that since the night of the play," he admitted. "I've wanted you to," she confessed, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. They stood together by the window, hands intertwined, the simple touch more intimate than the kiss had been. Outside, life in Independence continued, people walking by, wagons passing, the normal rhythm of a small frontier town. But within the quiet of Catharine's room, something profound had shifted between them. "Baker found papers in Sutton's quarters," Russell said after a while. "Letters that implicate him in the stagecoach robberies. He was working with the Carson gang, providing information about valuable shipments and passengers." "Was Peterson involved?" Russell shook his head. "No evidence of that. Peterson claims he had no knowledge of Sutton's activities, and on paper at least, that appears to be true." "You believe him?" "I don't know. Peterson's many things, but I never took him for a common bandit. Too much to lose." Catharine considered this. "What will happen now?" "Baker's still investigating. The Carson gang is still out there, minus 1 member, but without Sutton feeding them information, they'll likely move on to easier targets. And Peterson," Russell's expression hardened slightly. "He came to see me this morning. Offered his condolences for the unfortunate incident and assured me he had no knowledge of his foreman's criminal activities." "You don't sound convinced." "Peterson never does anything without an angle. I just haven't figured out what it is yet." A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Jenkins entered with a tray of food, her eyebrows rising at the sight of their clasped hands. To her credit, she made no comment, simply setting the tray on the small table by the window. "You need to eat, Miss Valmont," she said firmly. "And Mr. Lawson, Sheriff Baker was looking for you again." "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins," Catharine said, "for everything, The older woman's expression softened. "You're one of us now, dear. We take care of our own." After she left, Russell reluctantly released Catharine's hand. "I should go see what Baker wants. Will you come back later?" He nodded, his eyes warm. "Try and stop me." After he was gone, Catharine found her appetite had returned. She ate the simple meal Mrs. Jenkins had prepared: bread, cheese, and apple slices while watching the street below. Independence looked different to her now, more real somehow. It was no longer just a temporary stop on her journey, but a place where she had experienced fear, kindness, violence, and now, perhaps, the beginnings of love. The thought should have frightened her. She had come west to be a governess, to build a quiet, independent life after the losses she had suffered in St. Louis. Romance had not been part of her plan. And yet, there was Russell, with his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness, making her reconsider what she wanted for her future. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. School resumed, with Catharine returning to her teaching duties despite Miss Parsons's offer to manage alone for a while longer. The familiar routine was comforting, and the children's enthusiasm helped distract her from the lingering trauma of Sutton's attack. Russell walked her to and from school each day, a practice that raised eyebrows but was generally accepted given the circumstances. Their relationship was evolving, growing deeper with each conversation, each shared moment. They were careful to maintain propriety in public. Mrs. Jenkins's rules about gentlemen callers were strictly enforced, but the connection between them was unmistakable to anyone who saw them together. A week after Sutton's death, Sheriff Baker called a town meeting to address the investigation into the stagecoach robberies. The town hall was packed, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the street. Baker stood at the front, flanked by his deputy and Mayor Harrison. "As most of you know," Baker began, "Wade Sutton, former foreman of the Peterson Ranch, was killed while attempting to abduct Miss Catharine Valmont. Subsequent investigation has confirmed that Sutton was involved in a series of stagecoach robberies, including the one that Miss Valmont survived, and a more recent attack that left 3 dead." A murmur ran through the crowd. Baker held up his hands for silence. Documents found in Sutton's quarters indicate that he was working with the Carson gang, providing them with information about valuable shipments and passengers. There is no evidence that anyone else in Independence was involved in these criminal activities. From the back of the room, a voice called out, "What about Peterson? He hired Sutton, kept him close. You saying he didn't know what his own foreman was up to?" Baker's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Peterson has cooperated fully with our investigation. No evidence links him to the robberies." James Peterson himself rose from his seat near the front. He was impeccably dressed, as always, his silver hair neatly combed, his expression one of dignified sorrow. "If I may, Sheriff," he said, his voice carrying easily in the crowded hall, "I would like to address my neighbors directly." Baker nodded, stepping aside to allow Peterson to take his place. "Friends," Peterson began, "I cannot express the depth of my shock and dismay upon learning of Wade Sutton's criminal activities. I trusted him implicitly, gave him authority over my business affairs, welcomed him into my home. His betrayal is a personal affront that I will feel for years to come." Catharine, sitting beside Russell near the middle of the room, felt him tense at Peterson's words. She placed a hand on his arm, a silent gesture of support. "More importantly," Peterson continued, "I feel a deep responsibility for the harm Sutton caused while in my employ. The lives lost in those robberies weigh heavily on my conscience. While I cannot bring back the dead, I can offer some small recompense to those affected." He turned, looking directly at Catharine. "Miss Valmont, who who survived one robbery only to be targeted again by Sutton, has shown remarkable courage throughout this ordeal. I would like to establish a fund in her name at the school to provide books and supplies for the children of independence." The announcement was met with approving nods and murmurs. Catharine sat frozen, unsure how to respond to this unexpected gesture from a man she had been taught to view as an enemy. Peterson wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I wish to publicly acknowledge a wrong I committed years ago. Russell Lawson purchased land from me in good faith, only to find that I had withheld crucial information about water rights that affected the property's value. While I maintained at the time that our transaction was legal, I now recognize that it was not ethical." Russell's arm under Catharine's hand was rigid with tension. His face betrayed nothing, but she could sense his disbelief at Peterson's sudden change of heart. "To make amends," Peterson continued, "I am prepared to release the water rights to Mr. Lawson's property, allowing him to develop it as he originally intended. It is a small step toward healing old wounds and bringing our community closer together." The room erupted in conversation, people turning to their neighbors to discuss this unexpected announcement. Baker eventually restored order, thanking Peterson for his remarks and concluding the official portion of the meeting. As people began to disperse, Peterson made his way through the crowd toward Catharine and Russell. The rancher's expression was solemn, but there was a glint in his eye that Catharine didn't trust. "Miss Valmont," he said, bowing slightly, "I hope my announcement wasn't too presumptuous. I genuinely wish to make amends for the trauma you suffered at Sutton's hands." "It was unexpected," Catharine replied carefully. "The children will benefit greatly from additional resources." Peterson turned to Russell, who had not spoken. "Lawson, I meant what I said about the water rights. My lawyer is drawing up the papers as we speak." Russell's voice was level, betraying none of the emotion Catharine knew he must be feeling. "Why the sudden change of heart, Peterson? After all these years?" The older man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say recent events have given me cause to reflect on my legacy in this valley. I'd prefer to be remembered for generosity rather than pettiness." "How convenient that this epiphany coincides with your foreman being exposed as a murderer and bandit," Russell observed dryly. Peterson's smile tightened. "Take it or leave it, Lawson. The offer stands, regardless of your opinion of my motives." He nodded to Catharine again before moving away, stopping to speak with other townspeople as he made his way out of the hall. "You believe him?" Catharine asked quietly once Peterson was out of earshot. Russell's expression was troubled. "I believe he'll follow through on the water rights. It's too public now for him to back out. As for his motives, Peterson doesn't do anything without calculating the advantage for himself." "What advantage could there be in helping you?" "In acknowledging he was wrong. I don't know," Russell admitted, "but I intend to find out." They left the town hall together, stepping into the warm evening air. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and purple. It was too beautiful an evening to dwell on Peterson's machinations. "Walk with me," Russell asked, offering his arm. Catharine took it, aware of curious glances from other townspeople, but past caring what they thought. After everything that had happened, the simple pleasure of walking arm in arm with Russell felt like a luxury she had earned. They strolled through town and beyond, following a narrow path that led to a small rise overlooking the valley. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky as they reached the top. "I wanted to show you this place," Russell said, helping her to a flat rock where they could sit comfortably. "Best view in the valley." Below them, Independence was a collection of twinkling lights, small and vulnerable against the vastness of the landscape. Beyond the town, The valley stretched away toward the distant mountains, bathed in the last light of day. "It's breathtaking," Catharine said softly. "This is where I come to think, to remind myself why I stayed despite everything Peterson did to drive me away." Russell's voice was quiet, reflective. "There's something about this land that gets under your skin, becomes part of you." Catharine understood what he meant. In the short time she had been in Independence, she had come to appreciate the stark beauty of the Eastern Sierra, so different from the gentler landscapes of the East. "What will you do now?" she asked. "With your land, if Peterson really does release the water rights?" Russell was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "What I always planned to do, build a horse ranch. Good breeding stock is hard to come by out here, but there's demand for it." "It's a good dream," Catharine said. "I'm glad you'll finally have the chance to pursue it." He turned to look at her, his expression serious in the fading light. "I've been thinking about a lot of things lately, about the future, about what I want." Catharine's heart beat a little faster. "And what do you want, Russell?" "I want to build something lasting, not just a ranch, but a life." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I know we haven't known each other long, Catharine, but I can't imagine that life without you in it." The words hung between them, not quite a proposal but more than a declaration of affection. Catharine found herself at a crossroads. The independent life she had planned for herself in San Francisco, or a future here in Independence with Russell. "I came west looking for a fresh start," she said slowly. "A place where I could build a new life away from painful memories. I never expected to find it in a small town in the Eastern Sierra. I never expected to find you." Russell's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight. Just want you to know where I stand, what I'm hoping for." Catharine leaned against his shoulder, finding comfort in his solid presence. "I care for you, Russell, more than I thought possible after so short a time, but you need time," he finished for her. "I understand." They sat together in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the stars emerged in full brilliance. This shared moment of peace felt precious after the tumult of recent days. Eventually, Russell stood, helping Catharine to her feet. "I should get you back before Mrs. Jenkins sends out a search party." The walk back to town was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts about the future. At the boarding house gate, Russell paused. "Good night, Catharine," he said, his voice soft in the darkness. "Good night, Russell." He bent to kiss her, a gentle, lingering kiss that held both promise and question. When they parted, Catharine felt a certainty settling over her, a clarity about what she wanted that had been missing before. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect early autumn day in the Owens Valley. Catharine rose early, her decision made. She dressed with care in her best borrowed dress. She would need to discuss with Mary the possibility of purchasing it outright now that she had a regular salary from teaching and went downstairs for breakfast. The other boarders were already at the table, discussing the previous night's town meeting and Peterson's surprising announcements. "It's a remarkable change of heart," Miss Parsons was saying as Catharine entered. "Peterson has never been known for generosity, especially where Russell Lawson is concerned. Men often reconsider their legacies as they age," Mrs. Whittaker observed. "Peterson must be past 60 now. Perhaps he's thinking of how he'll be remembered. Or perhaps he's trying to distract from Sutton's crimes," Miss Thompson suggested. "Everyone knows Sutton was Peterson's right-hand man for years. It's hard to believe Peterson had no idea what he was up to." Mrs. Jenkins cleared her throat meaningfully as Catharine took her seat. "Enough gossip at the breakfast table, ladies. We have our new school fund to be grateful for, whatever Mr. Peterson's motives may be." The conversation shifted to safer topics as they ate. Afterward, Catharine lingered, waiting until the others had departed before approaching Mrs. Jenkins. "Mrs. Jenkins, may I speak with you privately?" The older woman looked up from clearing the table. "Of course, dear. Is something wrong?" "Not at all. I wanted to discuss my future arrangements." Mrs. Jenkins' eyes narrowed slightly. "I see. This wouldn't have anything to do with a certain blacksmith, would it?" Catharine felt herself blushing. "In a way, yes. Russell has indicated that he sees a future for us together, and I find that I want that future as well." "Has he proposed marriage, then?" "Not formally, no. But I believe that is his intention." Mrs. Jenkins set down the stack of plates she was holding and took a seat across from Catharine. "Listen to me, Miss Valmont. I've lived in this town for 20 years. I've seen Russell Lawson grow from a determined young man with dreams to a respected member of this community, despite all Peterson did to hinder him. He's a good man, one of the best." "I know," Catharine said simply. "But, Mrs. Jenkins continued, I would be remiss in my duty if I didn't caution you against rushing into anything. You've been through a terrible ordeal, and sometimes our emotions in such times can lead us to decisions we might later regret." Catharine appreciated the older woman's concern, but her mind was made up. "I understand what you're saying, Mrs. Jenkins, but my feelings for Russell began before Sutton's attack, and they've only grown clearer since. I know my own mind." Mrs. Jenkins studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you do. Well then, what can I help you with regarding your future arrangements? I'm planning to speak with Russell today to tell him of my decision, but I wanted to ensure that my position here is secure until other arrangements can be made." A rare smile crossed Mrs. Jenkins' face. "Your room is yours for as long as you need it, my dear, though I suspect it won't be for much longer." Catharine impulsively reached across the table to squeeze the older woman's hand. "Thank you for everything, for taking me in, for your kindness." "Go on with you, Mrs. Jenkins said, though her voice was gentler than usual. "You'll be late for school if you dawdle here any longer." Russell was waiting outside as usual to walk her to the schoolhouse. He seemed quieter than normal, lost in thought as they made their way through town. "Is everything all right?" Catharine asked after several minutes of silence. He glanced down at her, a slight smile touching his lips. "Just thinking. Peterson's lawyer brought the water rights documents by this morning. It's official." "That's wonderful news." "It is, though I still can't figure out Peterson's angle." Catharine hesitated, then said, "Perhaps there isn't one. Perhaps he's genuinely trying to make amends." Russell's skepticism was clear. "Peterson doesn't do anything without calculation. He's playing a longer game than I can see, but I'm sure there's a game." They had reached the schoolhouse, where several children were already playing in the yard. Russell tipped his hat to Miss Parsons, who was watching them with undisguised interest from the doorway. "I'd like to talk to you after school," Catharine said quietly. "About what you said last night." Russell's expression grew serious. "I'll be here at the final bell." The school day passed in a blur of arithmetic lessons and reading groups. Catharine found it difficult to concentrate, her mind constantly returning to the conversation ahead. By the time the children were dismissed, she was a bundle of nerves and anticipation. Russell was waiting as promised, leaning against a tree at the edge of the schoolyard. He straightened as she approached, his expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Where would you like to go?" he asked. "Somewhere private," Catharine replied. "Where we can talk without the entire town watching." He nodded, understanding her meaning. "I know just the place." They walked beyond the edge of town, following a small stream that wound its way through willows and cottonwoods. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, dappling the ground with patches of light. Eventually, they reached a small clearing where a fallen log provided a natural bench beside the burbling water. "No one will disturb us here," Russell said, gesturing for Catharine to sit. She did, smoothing her skirts nervously. Russell remained standing, his tall frame silhouetted against the trees. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," Catharine began. "About wanting to build a life and wanting me to be part of it." Russell nodded, his expression guarded. "I meant every word." "I know you did." Catharine took a deep breath. "When I left St. Louis, I was running from pain. My parents' deaths, a broken engagement. I thought I needed to be completely independent to never rely on anyone again." Russell's eyes widened slightly at the mention of a previous engagement, but he didn't interrupt. "Coming to independence wasn't in my plans," she continued. "Neither was meeting you. But sometimes life takes us in directions we never expected, and we find exactly what we need, even if it wasn't what we thought we wanted." She stood, moving to stand before him. "What I'm trying to say, Russell, is that I want that future with you. I want to build a life together." The caution in his expression gave way to joy. He reached for her hands, holding them between his own. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel rushed, or like you owe me anything because of what happened with Sutton." "I've never been more sure of anything," Catharine said firmly. "This isn't about gratitude or obligation. It's about how I feel when I'm with you, safe, respected, valued. It's about the man I've come to know, whose quiet strength and integrity have shown me what true character looks like." Russell's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I love you, Catharine Valmont. Have since the day you woke up in my bed and insisted on paying me back for my help." Catharine laughed, tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "And I love you, Russell Lawson, though I think I fought against admitting it even to myself for quite some time." He pulled her gently into his arms, his embrace warm and secure. "I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures, but I promise you this: I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret this decision." "I know you will," Catharine whispered against his chest. "That's why I made it." They stood together in the dappled sunlight, the stream murmuring beside them, the mountains standing sentinel in the distance. In that moment, Catharine knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home not in a place, but in a person. Russell tipped her chin up, his blue eyes serious. "I should do this properly." He lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands. "Catharine Valmont, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will." Their kiss was a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, Russell reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object that glinted in the sunlight. "I've been carrying this for days," he admitted, showing her a simple gold band. "Had it made from a gold nugget I've kept since my mining days." "Not fancy, but it's perfect," Catharine interrupted, extending her left hand. Russell slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her. "We should wait at least a month before the wedding," Catharine said as they walked hand in hand back toward town. "It would be more proper." Russell nodded, though there was a hint of impatience in his expression that made her smile. "A month it is. That'll give me time to start work on the house." "House? On my land. Now that I have the water rights, I can begin building properly." "I've had the plans in my head for years." The thought of a home built by Russell's hands, designed specifically for their life together, filled Catharine with a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "I can continue teaching until the wedding," she said thoughtfully. "And perhaps even after, if Miss Parsons is agreeable, at least until we start a family." Russell's steps faltered slightly at the mention of children. "A family," he repeated, his voice soft with wonder. "I'd like that, very much." They reached the edge of town just as the sun was beginning to set. By unspoken agreement, they headed for the boarding house first, to share their news with Mrs. Jenkins. The older woman greeted their announcement with a knowing smile. "Well, It's about time. I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other forever. Reverend Phillips was next, to arrange for the ceremony and necessary preparations. The minister was delighted, promising to announce the engagement at Sunday's service and offering the use of the church for the wedding. "The whole town will want to attend," he said, beaming. "It's not every day we get to celebrate a love story like yours." Finally, they visited Sheriff Baker, who had become a friend to them both through the ordeal with Sutton. "Congratulations," he exclaimed, pumping Russell's hand vigorously. "Can't say I'm surprised. The way you two look at each other, it was only a matter of time." As they made their way back to the boarding house for Catharine's curfew, Russell suddenly stopped in the middle of the street. "What is it?" Catharine asked, concerned by his abrupt halt. Russell was staring at the saloon across the street where James Peterson had just emerged. The rancher spotted them and, after a moment's hesitation, crossed to where they stood. "Lawson, Miss Valmont." He nodded to each of them. "Pleasant evening, Peterson," Russell acknowledged stiffly. Peterson's gaze dropped to their clasped hands, then to the ring glinting on Catharine's finger. A slight smile crossed his face. "I see congratulations are in order." "Thank you," Catharine replied when Russell remained silent. "I'm glad to see that something good has come out of these tragic events," Peterson continued. "Perhaps it will help heal some of the divisions in our community." Russell's jaw tightened. "What are you playing at, Peterson? First the water rights, now this apparent goodwill. What's your angle?" Peterson sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 60-plus years. "No angle, Lawson, just the recognition that I've made mistakes. Holding on to old grudges serves no one, least of all me. You expect me to believe that, believe what you like. But consider this, I'm not getting any younger. My son has no interest in ranching, prefers life in San Francisco to the valley. When I'm gone, what happens to everything I've built? I need good neighbors, people who understand this land and respect it, people like you." Russell's expression remained skeptical. "And it took Sutton being exposed as a murderer and bandit for you to reach this conclusion." Peterson's face hardened momentarily, then relaxed. "Sutton's betrayal forced me to reconsider many things, including who I've chosen to trust. He was like a son to me, and he used that position to involve my name, however indirectly, in robbery and murder." He looked directly at Catharine. "I owe you an apology, Miss Valmont. I allowed Sutton's suspicions about you to color my own judgment. He suggested you were not what you claimed to be, that your story about the stagecoach robbery was exaggerated. I should have recognized his fear of exposure for what it was." Catharine was startled by the admission. "Thank you for telling me," she said cautiously. Peterson turned back to Russell. "As for you, Lawson, we've been enemies long enough. I propose a truce. Not friendship, that's asking too much, but peaceful coexistence. What do you say?" Russell was silent for a long moment, weighing Peterson's words. Finally, he extended his hand. "A truce, then, but I'll be watching, Peterson. Old habits die hard." The rancher shook Russell's hand firmly. "Fair enough. Congratulations again on your engagement. Good evening to you both." As Peterson walked away, Catharine studied Russell's face. "Do you believe him?" "Not entirely," Russell admitted, "but it's a start. And if he's serious about the truce, it makes our lives simpler." They continued to the boarding house, where Russell left Catharine with a kiss that earned them a disapproving look from Mrs. Jenkins through the window. "I'll see you tomorrow," he promised. "We have plans to make." The month of their engagement passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Russell divided his time between his blacksmith work and building their new home on his land, often working from dawn until dusk. Catharine continued teaching, using her evenings to prepare for married life with help from Mrs. Jenkins and the other boarders. News of their engagement spread quickly through Independence, with most townspeople expressing genuine happiness for the couple. A few, particularly those closely associated with the Peterson ranch, were more reserved in their congratulations, but no one openly opposed the match. True to his word, Peterson maintained a respectful distance, neither seeking Russell out nor avoiding him. When they encountered each other in town, they exchanged civil greetings before continuing on their separate ways. It wasn't friendship, but it was a vast improvement over their previous hostility. 2 weeks before the wedding, Russell took Catharine to see the progress on their house. The ride out to his land took less than an hour, following the creek that Peterson had previously denied him access to. Now, with the water rights secured, Russell had ambitious plans for irrigation and breeding operations. The house itself was taking shape nicely, a sturdy 2-story structure built of local timber and stone. It was larger than Catharine had expected, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides and tall windows to capture the mountain views. "It's beautiful," she said as Russell helped her down from the wagon. "Much grander than I imagined." Russell looked pleased by her reaction. "Been designing it in my head for years. Wanted to get it right." He showed her through the partially completed rooms, describing his plans for each space. A large kitchen with a view of the garden he intended to plant, a comfortable parlor where they could entertain guests, a study where Catharine could continue her interest in literature and perhaps tutor local children. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, the master suite for them, and 3 additional rooms for the future, as Russell put it with a slightly embarrassed smile. "You've thought of everything," Catharine marveled. "I want it to be perfect for you," Russell said simply. "A place where you'll be happy." Catharine squeezed his hand. "It's not the house that will make me happy, Russell. It's sharing it with you." The day of their wedding dawned clear and crisp, a perfect autumn day in the Owens Valley. Catharine dressed in the boarding house parlor, which Mrs. Jenkins had cleared of furniture to accommodate the preparations. Mary and Miss Parsons helped her into the wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Whittaker had skillfully altered from one of her own cherished possessions. "Something borrowed," Mrs. Whittaker had said when presenting the dress to Catharine, "and very old. I wore it when I married Mr. Whittaker in 1830. Miss Thompson contributed a delicate blue ribbon for Catharine's hair, something blue, while Mrs. Jenkins surprised her with a new pair of kid leather gloves, something new. "That leaves something old," Miss Parsons observed as they put the finishing touches on Catharine's appearance. "I have that covered," Catharine said, touching the small locket around her neck. Inside were miniature portraits of her parents, the one possession she had kept with her during the stage-coach journey rather than packing it in her trunk. It had survived the robbery because it had been hidden beneath her dress, close to her heart. The church was filled to capacity when Catharine arrived. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the occasion, dressed in their Sunday best. Sheriff Baker stood at the church door, waiting to escort her down the aisle in the absence of any family. "You look beautiful, Miss Valmont," he said, offering his arm. "Lawson's a lucky man. Thank you, Sheriff, for everything." Catharine took his arm, her heart racing with a mixture of nervousness and joy. The simple church had been decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons, transforming it into a space of celebration. As the small organ began to play, the congregation rose, turning to watch Catharine's entrance. But Catharine had eyes only for Russell, who stood at the altar with Reverend Phillips. He was dressed in a new suit, his normally unruly hair tamed for the occasion, his expression a mixture of awe and love as he watched her approach. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. They exchanged vows and rings, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their days. When Reverend Phillips pronounced them husband and wife, Russell kissed Catharine with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The celebration afterward was held in the town hall, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by nearly every household in Independence. There was music and dancing, laughter and good wishes from friends new and old. To Catharine's surprise, James Peterson attended the reception briefly, offering a polite congratulation before departing. It was a small gesture, but a significant one in the context of his history with Russell. As the evening wore on, Russell led Catharine out into the cool night air for a moment of quiet together. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist as they stood beneath the stars. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this life, this happiness." Russell kissed her temple gently. "You came to Independence with nothing but fear and found a home. I'm grateful every day that your stagecoach was robbed." Catharine laughed softly. "That's a terrible thing to say, even if I understand the sentiment." "What I mean is," Russell clarified, "that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best. If you hadn't survived that robbery, if you hadn't collapsed in front of my livery, we would never have met," Catharine finished for him. "I know, it's a strange thing to be grateful for, but I understand." They stood together in the moonlight, the sounds of celebration continuing behind them. In Russell's arms, Catharine felt not just safe, but complete, as if the journey that had brought her west had always been leading her to this man, this place, this moment of perfect belonging. Later that night, after the last guests had departed and they were alone in their new home, Catharine stood by the bedroom window, looking out at the moonlit valley. Russell came up behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Lawson?" he asked, the new name sending a thrill through her. "About journeys," she said thoughtfully. "About how I came west looking for safety and independence and found so much more." Russell turned her to face him. "I promise you'll have both those things with me, Catharine, safety and independence. And love, always love." As he lowered his head to kiss her, Catharine knew with absolute certainty that she had found everything she had ever wanted, and much that she hadn't known to seek. In Russell's arms, in this house, in this valley, she had found not just safety, but a place to truly belong. 5 years later, Catharine sat on the wide porch of their home, watching as Russell taught their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, played at her feet with wooden blocks, occasionally looking up to wave at her father and brother. The Lawson Horse Ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. Russell's breeding program was producing some of the finest horses in California, sought after by ranchers and cavalry officers alike. The creek that Peterson had once denied him access to now irrigated lush pastures, where mares and foals grazed contentedly. Independence itself had grown, though it remained a small town by any standard. The school where Catharine had once taught full-time now had 3 teachers, though she still helped occasionally when needed. Mostly, she focused on raising their children and managing the household aspects of the ranch, while Russell handled the horses and hired hands. Their relationship with James Peterson had evolved into a cautious mutual respect. The old rancher had indeed been sincere in his desire for reconciliation, though Russell had never fully trusted him. When Peterson died peacefully in his sleep the previous winter, he had surprised everyone by leaving Russell a significant portion of his grazing land in his will, with a note explaining that he wanted to ensure the valley remained in the hands of those who truly understood and loved it. Mary Thompson had married a young doctor who had arrived in Independence 3 years earlier, and they now had a baby of their own. She remained Catharine's closest friend, their families gathering often for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. Sheriff Baker still maintained law and order and independence, though he spoke increasingly of retirement. He had become like family to the Lawsons, a favorite uncle to James and Elizabeth. Mrs. Jenkins continued to run her boarding house with the same firm hand, though she had softened enough to allow the Lawson children to visit for tea and cookies when they came to town with their mother. As Russell lifted James down from the pony, praising the boy's natural seat and balance, Catharine felt a wave of gratitude for the life they had built together. From the ashes of tragedy, a stagecoach robbery, the loss of everything she owned had risen this beautiful, unexpected life. Russell looked up, catching her eye across the yard. His smile, still capable of making her heart skip a beat after 5 years of marriage, spoke volumes about the depth of their connection. He said something to James, who nodded solemnly before running toward the house, his small boots raising puffs of dust. Russell followed at a more leisurely pace, stopping to scoop up Elizabeth when she toddled down the porch steps to meet him. "Mama," James called as he reached Catharine. "Papa says I'm a natural horseman just like him." "I saw," Catharine said, ruffling his dark hair. "You rode beautifully." Russell climbed the porch steps, Elizabeth securely in his arms. "Another Lawson born to the saddle," he said proudly. Catharine stood, leaning into Russell's side as he put his free arm around her. Together, they looked out over their land, the house, the barns, the pastures, the distant mountains. Everything they had built, everything they had overcome, had led to this moment of perfect contentment. "I love you," Russell said quietly, for her ears alone. "Every day more than the last." Catharine turned her face up to his. "And I love you, always have, always will." Their kiss was interrupted by James's theatrical groan of disgust and Elizabeth's giggle. Laughing, they turned their attention back to their children, to the ranch, to the future they continued to build together in this wild, beautiful place that had become the only home Catharine ever wanted to know. In the distance, a stagecoach approached along the main road, kicking up dust as it headed toward Independence. Catharine watched it pass, remembering another stagecoach, another journey that had ended in violence and fear. How strange that such a terrible beginning had led to such a perfect life, a life filled with love, family, and the quiet strength of the man beside her. She had arrived with nothing but fear, and Russell had given her everything but reasons to be afraid. In doing so, he had given her the greatest gift of all, a love strong enough to overcome any obstacle, any doubt, any shadow from the past. Together, they had built a future brighter than either could have imagined alone, proving that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the most perfect destinations.